not going to lie, this section right here, Galatians 5:16 to the end of chapter 5, it was a convicting one to read. It was hard. 'Cause I know when I was younger, I would have read these things and it would kind of have glossed over it. But we took a week off from recording this. One, because I was traveling, but two, I just needed more time to sit with it. Because there's times in my life, and I'm sure other people feel this way too, but there's times in my life when I'm presenting something, either even in a teaching fashion or just in general sharing, where sometimes I just don't feel, I don't want to say worthy to share it, but I don't feel like it's right for me to, because I don't ever want to come off being a hypocrite. And there's things in here that on both the fruit of the flesh and fruit of the spirit that I was just sitting there like, wow, I am severely lacking in this. And that was either praise God that I'm lacking in fruit of the flesh, or dear Lord, help me because I am lacking severely in the fruit of the spirit. So this is going to be one that I'm going to try and not make super long of a video. I'm going to share some things from my notes and from commentaries and just to continue on with the series. But this is one that I really would like for you guys to also just really sit with. So, because there's a lot here. There's a lot we could talk about here. We could go word by word. And I think there'll be some really good things to pull from that. I'm going to do my best to keep this on the shorter end of our expository videos. I think this will be a good one, like I said, to go and study yourselves and not just hear someone else talk about it, but just to sit there and just let the Spirit convict and encourage in whatever part you're reading. But we'll move forward. This is verse 16 of chapter 5. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. This is just really interesting here because there's a lot of times in our culture today, where we kind of want to blend them together. And I think many times we just in general want to blend them together because there are times when we are silencing the Spirit so we can listen to the flesh, but we then also try to justify. Sometimes we get so silenced from the Spirit, like we stop feeling conviction because we're given into this power of sin that He's given us the strength to be free from. And we then justify, and because we don't hear His voice anymore, feel His presence anymore, when this sin comes up and we're not being convicted by it, we're being given up to it in a sense. It's almost like we then say, oh, that's when we finally found the way to do it. The Spirit is okay with it. I've heard Christian influencers talk about this. I know I felt this way before. I'm sure many others have felt this way before. We have to understand that the flesh and the Spirit, and this is not talking about like our bodies here, okay? It's not this. If you're watching, I'm pointing. If you're listening, I'm pointing to myself. But it's not our bodies. And it's not to say that the created material world is evil. That is definitely not the case. There are people who have made that argument in church history and even today, and that's just not what we're talking about, the flesh. What we are talking about is like the nature of human beings. I think another way I've been really coming to understand it more is that when you look at Genesis 3, it talks about how there will be the seed of the serpent and the seed of Eve. And there's as many times where just in Genesis alone, where you see people who are of the line of Jesus, who are the main characters, acting like serpents, acting out in this fleshly way, acting out in this sinful, dark, and twisted way. And that is a little more to the idea of what the flesh is. It's this nature, this part of us that is acting out in opposition to that of the Spirit. And if you've seen some of our other videos, we talked about like things like the image of God. We did a brief mini-series of which I now wish we could get a little bit deeper dive on that, because I've been studying a little bit more on that. But also, like, we did a video on why humanity is held to a moral standard and looking at those things. And when we understand more of like who we are, who we're created to be in relation to who the divine creator is, it kind of adds a little more weight to this whole flesh versus spirit issue. And they're kind of like water and oil. They do not mix together. They cannot mix together. If the spirit is God, which he is, and he is perfect, and he is the moral standard, then he is not going to just say you can go on and sin in this. Now, I'll just rephrase that. He may let you go on and do it, but he's not going to approve of it, right? There's a difference between allowing something to happen and then approving something to happen. Like, he allows people to continue to fall into sin. He allows them to make those choices, but he does not approve of those choices. It's kind of like a parent who allows sometimes a kid to do something that might hurt himself, but they don't, like, they didn't themselves get permission, like, hey, you can do this, I give you my approval. It's like, no, you know I told you not to do this, but you're going to do it anyways. And the flesh and the spirit are very much in opposition to each other. That, I mean, we'll just look at this list coming up, starting at verse 19. But let's get to verse 18 first. But starting back at verse 17, for the desires of the flesh are against the spirit, and the desires of the spirit are against the flesh. These are opposed to each other, right? We just mentioned that, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. So if you're wanting to live by the spirit, the ways of the flesh are going to try and stop you from doing that. If you want to live by the ways of the flesh, the spirit is going to try and stop you from doing that. You have to choose which one you're going to live by. As Paul talks about in Romans, like, you're a slave to either sin or to God. You're either going to be enslaved to your fleshly desires, or be in the ownership. And even though it sounds like, even though in Romans he says slavery, it's still this idea of freedom. And we see, like, even Jesus talking about in John 6 through 8. There's sections in there where he talks about being free. Specifically in chapter 8, where he's talking about this idea of being free from sin if you believe in him, instead of being enslaved by it. And these things are going to work against each other. They're going to fight each other and push back on each other. And it's not like the flesh is an equal opposite to the spirit, but it's the fact that we often give the flesh more time of day than we do give the spirit. And so our inclination is to want to go that direction instead of going the direction of the spirit, who has the greater power. He has the freedom that we long for, the peace that we long for, the relationship with the Lord, since he is God, we long for, but we give the flesh more time of day. And it's something we don't really, I think it's something we know, but until we really think about it, it doesn't register. And like I said, this section here, it's still convicting me in many ways, and just reflecting on my life in minor and major ways. Because we do tend to give the flesh more time on our minds and in our actions and in everything, rather than what the Spirit directs. So I want to go into this next little bit here and get into some of this list. We'll go through a couple things at 19. I'm going to read you some things that Timothy George had to say in his commentary, and then we'll get into the fruit of the Spirit. We'll probably spend more time in the fruit of the Spirit than we will in the fruit of the flesh, because I kind of want us to not necessarily get bogged down either in like, oh man, that's another thing I'm doing wrong. Like, oh yeah, drunkenness. Oh yeah, orgy. Like, I mean, you see on the screen here, like, if you look at this list right here, I don't want us to like go out here and like, oh man, yeah, I'm dealing with this, or I'm struggling with this, or oh, I know someone's struggling with that. I want us to look at the fruit of the Spirit, and then ask the question of, do I see this fruit in my life? And contrast it to the fruit of the flesh. Which fruit do I see more, and what do I think other people see more? And then what do people actually see more? So kind of doing like a self-assessment, more than just a, hey, let's go through each and every single word and talk about the deep different understandings from the Greek and the categorization. That'd be really cool to do. I would love to do that sometime with one of my friends who can read Greek fluently. But I want to do more of this, like let's sit here and compare lists in our lives. So at verse 18, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Right? This whole book has been about the idea of you are not under the law. And he's been spending this last little bit of time in chapter 5 going over why, okay, now that you are not under the law, now you've got the understanding, it does not mean you get to carry on in sin, right? So he's dealt with legalism and Galatianism for like the majority of the book. And then we hit chapter 5 where he deals with license very heavily, very specifically, because he wants to avoid the other extreme, especially because this other extreme has been popping up. So, what are these works of the flesh? Or you can even argue fruit of the flesh. If we look at what Jesus had to say, you'll know the false teachers by their fruit. Right? And I think it's true of everyone. Will know who they are based on their fruit. Or will have a perception of what they might be based on their fruit. Now, the works of the flesh are evident. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Okay. So what's interesting here is that we won't get super duper into the Greek, but these are grouped in categories. For instance, we have sexual morality, impurity, and sensuality all grouped together. Now, yes, orgies are put toward the bottom, but the orgies ones are closer to the issue of the drunkenness, okay? At least in time, where you have drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. Then you have idolatry, sorcery, enmity. Like some of these things are now dealing with things that dealing with dark forces and demonic spirits, such as idolatry for false gods and sorcery, which would use black magic and drugs that would cause hallucinations or freedom feeling in the mind, as some people characterize. And this is where we get the Greek word pharmaceuticals from, of which some people would point out saying this is how we know that drug abuse is definitely a sin, and that the drugs that are, getting people high are a problem, because they fall under a similar Greek word and then usage. But again, looking more specifically at the idea, like, okay, this is not just dealing with the pharmaceuticals, but also dealing with the idea of dealing with dark forces. And then social issues like enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions. So we see here is like Paul is not just making a list in like here's most important to least important. He's going over this list of like, here's the different categories I want you to go understand. The things such as sexual issues, the things such as sober issues, the things such as idolatrous and spiritual issues, issues such as social problems within the church. And this is not an exhaustive list, because notice he says, and things like these. So this is not the list of everything of the flesh. This is just a list of the ones that were heavy hitting, probably in the church at this time and in our church today, just across the world. Especially, I would say, in America, just because that's where I live and that's what I understand, we have a lot of these things popping up, even in our own lives, if we were to be honest. So, taking a look at this list here, these are things, this is just a small list of, I would argue it's a small list of all the things that really separate us from being like God and things that are working in the flesh, things that are in opposition to the Spirit. Because God, who created, for instance, let's take the sexual issue, He created a moral sexual code, which is to have sex between a man and woman in the confinement of marriage. Now, do we see people in the Bible not doing that? Yes, and there are times where it appears that God's not judging them for it. Yes, we do get that with like the whole concubine stuff. And just because something happens in the Bible does not mean it's does not mean it's prescriptive. Let me just put it that way. There are descriptive events where people are going out and doing sexually immoral things, but that is not a prescription for us to go and do those things, like polygamy, like adultery, like fornication, like homosexuality. These things are in opposition to His moral code for sexual ethics. It is not pure to do these other things. therefore giving into this fleshly desire to just gratify yourself. Then idolatry, sorcery. Well, we've talked about before the image of God, that if you're attributing worth to something else, one, you're trying to reflect an image onto something else. You're also passing your job as an imager onto something else. And then you're also trying to say that God approves of it by being his image bearer to begin with. So those things are actually not just against us, those are against God in where we place our faith and in what we're saying he approves of. Really, to do any of these things, whether we're consciously saying the Spirit approves of it or whether we're not doing it, I would argue that because all mankind is still made in God's image, that when we sin, we are falsely attributing these things as if God approves of it, even if we don't consciously believe in the Christian God or think that we are doing that. And then there are some who do realize and they're saying, oh yeah, God approves of this. God's okay with it. He knows my heart. He knows I still love him. These things are in opposition to him. But like I said, we're not going to go super duper deep into these things. If you are watching, you'll see on my screen that there's this whole section in Timothy George's commentary. I looked at the three main ones I mentioned to you guys, and what's really cool is that he has this section right here, a catalog of evil, of which he goes through each individual word and gives like a paragraph to 2 paragraphs on breaking it down to a deeper understanding using the Greek or just the context and providing some deeper clarity to why these words are chosen or why he thinks these words are chosen and what they have to mean in the Greek and what they do with the issue of like the different categories. So for instance, we have here, I just scrolled past it, sins of animosity, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition. And he categorizes these things quite well and gives, just like I said, just like a paragraph to 2 paragraphs, maybe 3 for some, breaking down either the Greek, other passages, or just the context in general, and giving a better understanding of what these words might mean, depending on the translation you're reading. If you're reading his translation, or a translation that uses words that maybe you're not aware of, he breaks it down here. So I really recommend this commentary. It's, especially for this section, it's been really helpful for me. But I think it would be more, I don't want to say more beneficial, but be very beneficial for us. It's like I said, to go down to the fruit of the Spirit. And I think that we can look at the list of the flesh and let's look at all the things that we're like, yep, I struggle with that. Yes, I struggle with that. Or yes, I have struggled with that. Or I still struggle with that. Or yes, I'm practicing that. Those kind of things. Or maybe I just did that last week or last night. And we'll see that, okay, clearly everyone struggles with something on this list. Or maybe he's giving into something on this list. And what we have to be clear is that what's interesting is that some translators, depending on the translation you're reading, will say, instead of those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom, they refer to those who practice such things. So this do seems to have more of just a, you gave in to the temptation or that you struggled with it. This idea of you are seeking it out and pursuing it, which is really terrifying to still think about, because I think we could still try to cover up by saying, oh, I just gave in to temptation. But we have to ask the question, did you give in to the temptation or did you actually seek it out? And I would be honest that there have been many times where I look back and I realized I did not just struggle with the temptation. I sought it out. I had a plan. If I look back on my day and just look up at those things, I was seeking that out. And the question is, are you constantly pursuing it, making it a practice of your life? These things, it's like a simple one, like drunkenness. If you're seeking out to be drunk, even though drinking alcohol is not a sin, widespread-wise, I say widespread-wise because you may have a personal conviction from the Lord to not drink, and for you would be a sin. But it would not be necessarily maybe like a sin for me, but if I was seeking to be drunk, that's the reason why I drank, then it would be a sin, because I'm not seeking to drink for the glory of the Lord. I'm seeking to drink for the hope to lose my sobriety and to lose control and to do something who knows what. Thankfully, I have no idea what I would do when I'm drunk. I've never been drunk, thankfully. Praise the Lord that he's given me discernment to not really drink, really. But And it's just because, I personally don't see a great need for it. My only reasons I would probably drink would be for special occasions like weddings or a date. But even then, it's not really like a big thing for me. I know there's some people who it is a big thing for them. They have um, addictive tendencies, and they recognize that, and they know that this would be a danger for them, so they consider it a sin for themselves, but not a sin for others. And then there are those who like, this doesn't bother me whatsoever, and I know where my line is. I know I have self-control, so they practice very well, and they do drink for the glory and for the relaxation to glorify the Lord. Well, let's get into the fruit of the Spirit. I also want to point out, I'll have to say the fruits of the Spirit. Notice it is fruit, singular, and in the Greek it is in the singular. Just a grammatical thing. It's like when people say revelations. No, it's revelation. Just get the grammar right. All right, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. This is a shorter list than the one above. And I would again say this is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but this is getting the point across. The fruit of the Spirit is love. All right, this one is agape. And if you've been in church, you probably have heard this word mentioned by your pastor at some point, which idea of like unconditional love that is being chosen to do. Joy and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. I want to point out that while the Greek word with joy has a relationship to happiness, it does not mean that if you're sad or if you're struggling to be happy, it does not mean that you're not a Christian, okay? Your relationship with the Lord, your walk with the Lord has nothing to do with your feelings, at least from what I can understand. Now, does he care about your feelings? Yes. And should we care about other people's feelings? Yes. But that is not the litmus test for your walk with the Lord, is how happy you are. And we see it even with David. He walked closely with the Lord, and there was many times in the Psalms where he's just outright depressed, and he's freaked out. So we need not make joy and happiness synonyms. While they can have a very deep relationship with each other, they're not synonyms necessarily, at least in the scriptural sense. Before we go to these next few, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. These are very simple terms. But the question then has to be asked, why didn't Paul put it here? They're so simple, and we know like, oh yeah, we're Christians, we gotta be patient. But do we know what it means to be patient? Do we know what it means to be patient? Are we willing to sit there and just take in what's happening? I would like to read this definition here from this lexicon: a state of emotional calm in the face of provocation or misfortune and without complaint or irritation. Notice it is not just talking about your patience with others. And this is one, I'm reading this one because I've reading it to myself as well. It's a state of emotional calm in the face of provocation or misfortune without complaint or irritation. No matter what the circumstances, are you patient with what the Lord is doing? Are you content with where the Lord has you? I don't know about you, but even just reading that brings a deep sense of conviction over my life. Am I finding myself to be with complaint and irritation frequently than I am without? Let's look at another one. Let's look at kindness. To provide something beneficial for someone as an act of kindness, to act kindly, to be kind, kindness. Right? It's more than just a smiling face. It's an action. Are you showing kindness towards others? Are you pursuing this idea of showing this kindness, whether it be through giving or through listening or what have you? Like, giving your time to other people is a big deal, and it means a lot. And it shows how deeply you care for them. And for Christians, we should deeply care about others because we want them to come to know the Lord, especially if they don't know the Lord. And if they do know the Lord, we want to help them grow closer to Him. I love this. Let's keep going. Let's look at goodness. the act of generous giving. Now, this is in the ESV. I always like, oh yeah, goodness, but that doesn't really make sense, right? We're thinking like goodness, like isn't all this stuff good? But here's more the nuance, the act of generous giving with the implication of this relationship to goodness, to be generous, generosity, right? This is not merely just being good to others. This is about being generous. Now we're talking more about your giving, specifically of your possessions to other people. Faithfulness, are you being faithful to the Lord? Are you seeking Him? Are you as in a state of being someone in whom complete confidence can be placed? Are you in a place where your complete confidence is in the Lord and that people can completely have trust in you? Now, they want the same trust in you that you have in the Lord and they should have in the Lord, but are you trustable? Are you trustworthy? Just as your Father is trustworthy. Are we seeking to be as trustworthy as Christ? Oh man, conviction is hitting hard again. So gentleness. Let's just keep going here. All right. I love this dictionary, but let's keep going. Gentleness of attitude and behavior in contrast with harshness in one's dealing with others. Gentleness, meekness, mildness. Again, these words, I think, when we read them just in English, and there's nothing wrong with the translation here. All right, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the translation. What I am saying though is that I think, at least in my experience, and if it happened in my experience, I'm willing to bet it's happened in some of yours experience too, that we tend to look at this and we see them all as synonyms, and so we just kind of gloss over them. But these have deeper meanings behind them, right? Gentleness, kindness, like, oh, that's the same thing. But they're slightly different in the Greek. They have a slight more nuance that has a little more weight to it. Self-control. This one, I'm not gonna lie, this one hurts a lot. To exercise complete control over one's desires and actions. To exercise complete control over one's desires and actions. To control oneself. To exercise self-control. 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 Are we exercising complete control over our desires? And what are our desires? Our desires tend to be the things that are up in this list above, the list of the flesh. Are we exercising control in this over that? And why would we be able to exercise control? Because we have the Spirit who gives us the strength and the power to exercise control over them. Question is, are we relying on the Spirit to do such a thing? We didn't do joy, so let's read joy real quick. Say of joy and gladness. Joy, gladness, great happiness. Very joyful in a number of languages. All right, and this, like I said, there's definitely some parallels and connections to joy and happiness, but they're not necessarily the exact same thing. And this dictionary doesn't really give a deep understanding of this one, but at the same time, when you tend to be joyful, you tend to also to be happy. Now, again, like I said, your litmus test is not whether or not how happy you are, but are you joyful about the works of the Lord? And if you are, well, then you probably will see some happiness. You may also still struggle emotionally and be upset, but you'll still find joy in the Lord, which will bring you peace, which will bring you patience, which will bring you kindness, which will bring you goodness, which will bring you faithfulness, which will bring you gentleness, which will bring you self-control. And I have to be honest, I at one point we just sat down and I was just thinking over these things. And one of the notes I wrote down was I listed several people who are in my personal life or who are people I follow that from what I gather, I understand I don't see everything and I don't see their personal lives always, especially if there are people I follow. But do I see these things in other people and who comes to mind immediately when I see these? And I listed a few and I'll list, and all of them are in some form of public figures, even the people I personally know. And I would like to share some of those names, because even if you don't agree with them on everything, you could just see a lot of these things in their lives. The first people that came to my mind were Tim Mackey from Bible Project, Frank Turek from Cross Examined, Tim Barnett, from what I can see, Mike Winger from the Bible Thinker, Robert Allen, who is my pastor from Crosspoint, Trent Thompson, who was my other pastor from West Shore Evangelical Free. And there's just so many people that if we really just stop and think, like, do we see this in other people's lives? And it's like, clearly, they clearly have the Spirit. They're clearly walking by the Spirit. But the point is, I don't mention those things because we want to compare ourselves to them. I mention those people as it is proof that this is possible. It's not like this is just a random list that is like, oh, give me the strength to do this. No, it is possible. And there are people alive today that exemplify that. And so I asked this question not to compare ourselves, but like, okay, do we see people in our lives who are doing this? Yes. Okay. Some are people that we maybe don't personally know, but we can be appreciative of seeing that example. But then there may be some people in our lives who do show this. And maybe the thing we need to ask them is not to compare ourselves to them, but to ask them to help us to grow in this area. So I ask you to look at this list, and if you need to go back and listen to the definitions, go ahead. But to sit here and ask the question, do I show these things in my personal and in my public life? Do I see these things? And do other people see these things? Are people seeing the fruit of the Spirit? Okay. They're only seeing you in your public life, but you also want to be able to assess your public life as well. But then the question is, do I see it in my private life? Am I living a double life? That's where we tend to see a lot of these other things come out to play a little bit more. Especially in the digital age where we have access to things like pornography or the sheer amount of alcohol we've access at our ability to purchase, or just messaging boards and social media where we can just type things and hide behind the keyboards. And then to look at the other list too, and to just contrast and think, am I living out more of the Spirit or more of the flesh? Knowing that I will struggle with the flesh, but am I seeing more focus on the Spirit and serving Him, or am I seeing more focus on the flesh? For Paul then says, if we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. We want to not be in conflict. We're already in conflict with spiritual forces and with the fact that the world wants to bring us down. But we need to not succumb to that level. We need to make sure we're living as Christ lived. And how did He live? Well, just to give you a taste, look at the fruit of the Spirit. If you want a greater taste, look at the Sermon on the Mount. If you want even greater taste, read the New Testament. If you want the fullest sense, read the entirety of the Bible. And you just see how God acts, how Jesus acted, how He lived. And why is that important? Because Jesus, one, lived by the Spirit. Also because Jesus is God and the Spirit is God. So if we live by the Spirit, so first off, are we saved? Yes. Okay, if we're saved and we have the Spirit. Okay. So then if we have the Spirit, we should be living and walking by the Spirit. We're not living by anything else. And if you're living by anything else, then you're really still, as Paul would characterize in Ephesians, dead. As we see in other passages, you're exiled still from God, from God's kingdom, and we want to come back into that kingdom and almost be like in the state of being exiled from the world, but yet still recognizing that our home is the world in a sense. Like, I know there's the whole phrase that this world is not my home. And in one sense, I understand what they're saying, because this world is not in the idyllic sect of what it should be. But at the same time, this is our home. We were created to live here. Maybe we can get into his whole exile thing some other day, preferably with someone that I can chat with this on. But the question is, do I look like I'm living more like the world around me, or more like Jesus. And if we want to have at least a small test of what it looks like to live like Jesus, we look at the fruit of the Spirit. And are we living by those things? And I would say I need work in this area. This is something that I'm praying for. And so I pray that you guys would as well look at this. I know we didn't do a super duper deep dive in this, but I want this to be more of a, not just like a, oh, let's dive into the intricacies, but looking at Christian living wise. Am I pursuing Christ? Am I living by the Spirit, or am I pursuing the flesh? Saying that I'm pursuing Christ. I think those are very important things to be asking ourselves. And on the other hand, this is not just a thing to convict us, but it's also rejoiceful when we can look at these things and say, I see these things in my life. I see this development. I see God doing his work in me. So I encourage you to look at these things, not just as I mentioned as conviction, because I've been convicted heavily by this, because I remember I just glossed over this. I've been really sitting here and trying to meditate on it. But also just look at these things and being encouraged by seeing what maybe the work of the Spirit has been done in your lives. So with that, we'll end here, and then we'll have one more video of Galatians. We'll end chapter 6 next time. That'll be the end of our first expository series, and it's been fun and exciting, and I hope this has been fruitful and beneficial for you. And then we'll see you guys in the next video.